Punchao, beautiful day. Imainalian Aliyanchu. I just said hello. Turaikuna, Nyanyaikuna to all my male and female friends, brothers and sisters. I am Miriam Yataco. I come from Peru. I grew up in a household in Lima where my mom spoke Quechua, and no one else could acknowledge that publicly because Quechua at that time was extremely, as it is now, still segregated. And with my dad, who was come from a coastal Indian tradition, which was Mochica. And I am happy that I am now in Istanbul, following a dream of coming to see such beautiful, extraordinary culture as what we know in Latin America as Constantinople. Mhm.
Mesleğinden bahsedebilir mesleği.
Could you talk a bit about your profession and why you chose this profession?
I am a sociolinguist. I come from having an experience of starting a bachelor's degree in sociology. Then, when I moved into the United States, I became a specialist in bilingualism. Then I entered uh, the field of sociolinguistics uh, because I have always been interested in issues of language as a social phenomenon. Um I think I became a sociolinguist, and I probably was a sociolinguist since I was a very little girl because as I said, I was born from a Quechua-speaking mother. My mom's first language was Quechua from the north, which is a central Ancash, the Quechua from Ancash, and I saw her suffer a lot in an urban setting. We lived in a middle-class neighborhood in which her language could not be acknowledged publicly. So, in many ways, the language was hidden in the house, and at some point growing up, I guess my father, who didn't speak the indigenous language, although he was indigenous, but his family had lost the language, decided that I would be much better speaking English. So I was sent to a British school, and they avoided for me to be exposed to speaking Quechua. No? So there was always this Quechua conflict and all of these ideological constructions of languages being more civilized, languages being more prestigious than other ones, and we had to hide something that I always felt very emotionally connected, which was the language of my mom. And also it prevented my mom to speaking the language to me, which I think made an incredible emotional effect on me because it created a silence between a mother and a daughter, and also created an even larger silence between my grandmother and other family members, and the new offspring of the family that was being denied, which is a human right. And one of the questions, even now after so many years of being a sort of seasoned sociolinguist, one of the questions I have for the Peruvian state is how come the language was able to survive all of the conquest, the 500 years of conquest time between the Spaniards, and then the birth of this Peruvian nation that to me was a continuation of whatever the Spaniards left. How was the language was able to travel so many obstacles, and it had to come up to my mom, and it wasn't really passed off to me. I felt that the Peruvian state needs to explain to me why is it that I didn't inherit with all the pride that a language inheritance should be, associated with. Why is it that was interrupted? No? That intergenerational interruption happened to me. Why was she muted? um, if you look at it from a language policy perspective, which is what I do a lot, I look a lot at language policies from around the world in situations of language discrimination, language exclusion. I see that sometimes we tend to look at these issues of language silencing as something more structural, where you have to include the government and different public policies. But what I tried for people to understand that this was a very personal issue because it affected the interaction of a granddaughter with her grandma and a daughter with her mother. And who can heal that? So that's been my, I think it's been the impulse that I've had in me. And I have been very lucky because I was selected by Dr. Joshua Fishman to be his assistant in the year 2001, and I remain next to him and his wife, Miss Gela Fishman, talking about these things. And I really have been helped personally and also professionally in terms of understanding what people goes on around the world, because my case is not just a single case. This is happening in so many ways with different degrees of pain and personal and professional exposure and effect in so many parts of the world. And in many ways I think it exemplifies that when we talk about endangered languages, we are also talking about endangering the emotional being of so many people who belong to that tradition, whose families speak the language, whose grandparents speak the languages, and how we need to pay respect not only to the language itself, which is what many people documenting languages do, but also to the people that speak the languages. There has to be an equilibrium of both things. Mm-hmm. I think I would say we could break into parts. No, one is the North America, which entitled the United States and Canada, in which the languages were erased tremendously, and many of them are already sleepy beauties, no? Using Gillette Zuckerman's theoretical proposal. Only, I think, the Navajo, for example, is a language that remains sort of strong. However, after the pandemic, many of the elders that grew up speaking Navajo only and they learned English at a later time in their life have passed away because of the COVID emergency. No? Now, in the south, if you start by Mexico and you go down up till the tip of Argentina and Chile, I would say the situation varies depending on this is, I think, the key to me, the possibility of the group of speakers, of the speech communities, controlling their territory. Even if in their territory they are poor, they are disregarded by the national state. For example, areas in Chiapas, the south of Mexico, areas in Guatemala, the languages have been able to be inherited from, the intergenerational communication has not been broken. But the other side is that most of these communities are really poor, and they suffer a lot from all kinds of different kind of things. No? But the languages are present. Also in Peru, I could explain about the situation of Quechua. Quechua is really a name that identifies the Inca language and the Inca Confederacy. We don't believe that it was an empire. We believe that it was a confederate situation. And the Incas had used this Quechua, which in Quechua is Runasimi, to sort of have people speak the language in their territories, no? And we are at this point around 10 to 12 million that are recognized in the official census from in Bolivia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, part of Argentina. It's not one language, but a family of languages. And depending on the different country and depending on the regions, for example, in central part of Peru, what we call the Huanca Quechua variety, it's almost finished. It has decreased tremendously because Spanish has been very aggressive in terms of education. Education has been tremendously a difficult factor for language maintenance and language preservation. No? In other areas of Peru, like the southern Peruvian area, which is usually identified as the area where Machu Picchu is and the Inca area, the language is still spoken, but it's shaken. You know, sometimes it decreases, sometimes it goes a little bit up. In Bolivia, the maintenance is very good, so I think Quechua is not, although it's in the list of endangered languages. The second language that I would speak is Aymara. Aymara is a strong language, a strong identity, spoken and in the millions, around 3 million in south of Peru, north of Chile, and Bolivia, and some part of Argentina too, due to migration. No, people migrate now to get jobs. It's strong. It's so strong that the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, is of my Aymara tradition. No? The other language that is very strong is Nahuatl in the north of Mexico. Nahuatl is associated to the Aztec Empire. Around 3 million, 2.5 million Nahuatl speakers in all of the area of northern Puebla, and even going down, it's highly spoken. Also, Maya from Mexico. You know, the area of Cancun, Quintana Roo, Yucatan, and Campeche. I was there last August looking at the, they have Maori methodology nest of languages there to work with their children. I must say this, that many people have sort of normalized, create a situation of it's normal that the languages will die. Okay, so we are fighting against that ideological perception that we have very few ways to stop that process, much more to reverse it. Okay, so that's one thing. However, because in the last 20 years there has been interest in the different states to create legislation to preserve languages. In Mexico, I saw, for example, an example of group of elders in the Zapotec community that went to one of the officials in the region and said, we would like for our language to start this process of being spoken again, and we can teach it. And that was a sort of effort that came even from the elders. I understand that it has been, the government has created ways to support that in a way that you're probably aware of this. I don't know if you know. There is this program that the United Nations and UNESCO has money for, which is that the elder would be paid a salary, and the elder would be paired with a young person, usually in the teens, better, and it would be like mentor and tutor kind of situation. And it has been very successful in Latin America, and it has been, I understand, even more successful in the languages of North America. I visited Kansas and Oklahoma in 2019, and I saw the results, which were really extraordinary in a way that teenagers or people in ages below 20 had been paid, placed in a situation in which they had to work every day with an elder, and they would work in learning the language, and they learned actually very well how to speak it. And also they also pair with some of the programs with linguists from the University of Oklahoma and other universities in the area to pick up new words or words that would emerge from the elders that were not necessarily in their lexicon. So I think it benefited in both ways, no? Documenting the language and also being able to speak it. There is another example, very successful, with the Cherokee language of Oklahoma and North Carolina. Because the Cherokee has a different, it's a very sad story, no? They were such a, considered some of the civilized tribes, and one of their elders, Sequoia, created a writing system. Therefore, in the a few years in which the Cherokee became in contact with the white people, let's say, they not only learn English fast, they're very good language learners, but they also learn how to read and write in English and in their own language. There is and they created a newspaper. Yeah, the Cherokee Telegraph. It's an entire story outside of the ordinary, the situation of the Cherokee. So now, for example, there are, so at some point, because they were so intelligent, they were dangerous, so they separated them. They sent some of the Cherokee on a trail of tears to Oklahoma, to North Carolina. So right now, the Cherokee from North Carolina, I can send you the documentary of how they have a kind of a total immersion program in Cherokee, in which they teach the kids, very young kids, kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, how to speak the language and how to read and write first in the Cherokee alphabet. I think it's the experience of coloniality. In Peru, we have something called coloniality of power and coloniality of understanding knowledge, coloniality of knowledge. There is this sense that there are languages who are superior and languages who are inferior. There are languages who carry a written system and have a literacy tradition, mainly but not exclusively to the Latin alphabet. And there are all these other languages who are languages with deficit, no? They don't even know how to read and write. They speak these languages that are associated to less intelligent sort of cultures. And I think there has been such a tremendous amount of suffering in the individuals in these communities that they, like my parents, they decided they didn't want me to speak the language. I had to study the language bitterly later on to regain it, and it will never be the same. That I have to say that, because you speak the first language as a first language, and if you regain it, you can speak it up to a degree. But I have to accept that sometimes we move ourselves in the language that has more power in society. So I think there is this lack of respect for certain languages, and that's why many parents feel that they don't want to do their children to suffer as they did. So I think that's one thing, and also the pervasive effect of monolingualism. I think that's a very interesting question that makes me think a lot. I think in many ways the state pressures, because they have an agenda that they need to be complying with on paper. And on the other hand, there is a paradox situation in the indigenous communities that speak the language because they are being told that their language is of value and that they should speak it, but when they go into the city or into the university, the language has no value at all. They speak with an accent that is going to be extremely, identified and completely segregated. So it's like living in a world that you don't know where to stand. No? There is a contradiction going on there. I think one good example would be Paraguay. Paraguay is the only country in all Latin America that was able to, from the inception of the country, when the country was born, most of these countries in Latin America were born after the 1820s, that they declared Guarani, which is the indigenous languages of that area, as an official language. So most Paraguayans being indigenous or not, do have some kind of conversational knowledge in Guarani and in Spanish. Okay, there are new studies that say that if you're dark, rural, and poor, even if you speak Spanish and Guarani, you would be treated worse. And if you are white, mestizo, and you do speak Guarani, you would definitely have a better situation. Being this or not always going up and down, the reality is that Guarani has always been acknowledged, and that is something that is completely absent in all of the other countries in Latin America.
Are there any academics who has shown a great presence in the name of preserving these
Yes.
languages?
Yes, of course. In the area of sociolinguistics, I would say Dr. Joshua Fishman is the father of sociolinguistics, at least in the Americas, no? And he started teaching in the United States. Created the field of sociology of language, sociolinguistics. Toves Kutnapangas also. Toves' contribution is absolutely extraordinary because she concentrated on the fairness of bilingualism in children. When children are being exposed to situations in which they speak one language at home and they're forced into a colonial or another language outside, no? And that psychological effect. She also created she coined some terms like linguistic genocide and linguicism. Linguicism is a very important that we have adopted that in Latin America. That when you are there's racism, there's linguicism when you are discriminated for the language that you speak, no? And there are many more people in Latin America that work on these areas in Mexico. There are a few networks. Some of them are more associated to the officialdom of the states, and I truly not trust them that much because they are going to accommodate their agenda according to what the states would like to happen. However, there are a number of networks that especially now are being highlighted because of we have started the 10 years of indigenous languages declared by the United Nations, no? And one of them is the group that I created in 2014. We are 15,000 now. We're very active, and we do have meetings to see what we do, especially when people are being physically disappeared, no? Like in Costa Rica. And it's not only about language, no? It is about what language means in terms of the association with control of land, the relationship between language and territory, and language as territory. You know, symbolically, you grew up speaking your language, you're standing in a territory. So, if, like in the Amazon, for example, the Shipibo or the Awajun are being thrown out of their land near the rivers in the Amazon because there is oil or there precious lithium, and they want to get rid of them, of course the language is going to suffer because the people are being dislocated from their space. You know? So we have a lot of networks, and many of the networks are controlled and guided by indigenous peoples. I am right now reflecting what is going on in my own country, in which people are being killed. People who speak languages, the languages Quechua, Aymara, especially in the area of Puno, are being killed because we are indigenous and speaker of indigenous languages are perceived as less of a normal citizen. And this is not going to stop until there are reparations, and that is going to happen only when the states in the world look at us as full human beings, as